Well, good morning, Ascent. I'm Bill Stevens. I'm the lead pastor here, and it is so good to have you guys here today. We are finishing up our series today. We've been on, this is our 6th week on all the feels, all those things, that the feelings that we bring into this room that can sometimes dictate what's going on in our lives, sometimes be an indication on what's going on in our heart. We've been unpacking those. If you've missed them, go online and you can listen to them. Today, John Woolner, our discipleship pastor, is going to be speaking, and he's talking on disappointment. And man, that's going to be a big one. It's one that all of us have felt, and I can't think of anybody that would be better at speaking into this than John, because of that tender heart that he's got, that he'd step in this with us. And so we're going to do that today. We're going to have take communion today when he's done, and we do that at the end of each of our series, so we're going to do that today as well. So it's going to be a great morning for you guys. Before we get started with that, I just want to give you a little bit, okay? The vision of our church for the good of our city. I hope you all know that, or at least read that when you come walking in here on the signs that are out there, for the good of our city. You guys, we want to be a church that is always looking at the ways that we can bless the people around us. We don't want to be a country club where you come in here on Sunday mornings and it's just here. We want to be people that are always looking for the ways to bless our cities. That is played out in lots of different ways. Some of you know that a couple of weeks ago we hosted Monarch's high school homecoming here. 800 kids were in here for homecoming. You guys, that was a big step for it was so great. Thank you. We can clap that, you guys, because you guys, that was Jim, the co-lead pastor, when we first started Ascent. That was one of the dreams that we had, is someday that our high schools would trust us enough that they'd be able to use us as their home away from home. And that's what they did with homecoming a couple of weeks ago. We had a blast being able to do that on Saturday night. And you guys, this weekend, here's another one. That's for the good of our city. This weekend, today, tomorrow, and all next weekend, our high schoolers are going to go to people's houses that the houses that were burned in the fire and that they haven't been able to rebuild yet. It's just their properties now, and they're filled with weeds, and the city wants them to clear out their weeds. But that's a traumatic thing for a lot of folks that still haven't even been back to their properties. Our high schoolers this weekend and next weekend are going to be going to those houses and trying to clear out as many of them as they can, you guys. That's being for the good of our city, okay? And then the one that's coming up, October 7, is our Chief Hayes project. 6 years ago, the former chief of police here in Louisville, Chief Hayes, and I went on a walk. And he said, Bill, I just want to care for people. That's what I want to do. And he said, but I don't have the hands and feet to do it. And I said, what if you trusted Ascent to be your hands and feet? What if we became a church that said, whatever you see, the need that you see, we'll help you? And that began our relationship with the chief of police and the police department. It began what we're trying to do and trying to bless our community with the Chief Hayes Project. It began our relationship with Parco della Zingaro at Mobile Home Park just up the road, our friends just up the road, and the help that we can give there. And that was the Chief Hayes Project. And we've been doing that every single year. Opportunities for you guys to get out in the community, get your hands dirty, and help a ton of other people. Okay, so here is one example, one person's experience with that. Let's listen.
So as we prepare for Chief Hayes Project 2023, I want to kind of let you into what it's like to be a part of it. So I asked Jack if he would answer a few questions about, look, what's the experience? And kind of, Jack, for you, you've done this for a while. Why do you keep coming back? Why do you keep serving with us at the Chief Hayes Project?
I've been doing this for 5 years, and Chief Hayes actually identified the trailer park here as one of the places that needs the most help in our city. And so that's why I keep coming back. I love doing the work. I love painting, doing some painting people's decks, doing light construction. I actually like meeting the homeowner and saying, hey, we're from Ascent Church. We're right down the street from you. And so, that's why I keep coming back. And the people whose home you help, they're proud of that. And their neighbors are like, where'd you get those people? We want that help.
Oh, man.
And so, how much did that cost?
Right.
It's free in the name of Jesus. That's pretty awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a quote for you.
Yeah.
I love that. In your experience, and as you've been doing this, maybe you have one or two, or maybe just a moment that stands out about your experience with this project?
Wow, I have many moments.
Okay.
The lady I think the second home that we helped her, the second year, we went in and we had a lady that needed all of the skirting on her trailer redone.
Okay.
And we replaced all of it.
Wow.
And it was falling off or was non-existent already.
Wow.
And I still drive by her trailer every once in a while and I see the work we did.
Man.
And it was a real blessing to her, and she loved it, and she was really happy about that.
If you were to share, or if you were to say send an invite, if you were, someone was thinking, man, I'm curious about that, I think I may want to even participate in that Chief Hayes project, what would you, Jack, say to that person?
To them? So we're doing yard work, right?
Yeah.
So bring your tools, bring your rakes, bring your hand saws, whatever, and be prepared to do some light yard work, not really heavy duty.
Yeah.
And Ascent provides everything really, and so I would say come on down, bring your kids. Your kids will love it. They'll have fun. I think last year we did some yard work, and I was teaching one of the kids how to climb inside a Home Depot bag, the clippings bag and all that.
Wow.
So you should see these kids walking around, with a bag over their head. But yeah, it's fun. We, as a family, Ascent family, we get together and do some yard work really, and bless the homeowner and bless people and introduce that we're part of the city here.
So we get that kind of point of contact. I love that. Well, it sounds great. And look, if you're thinking about joining us for Chief Hayes, we just want to let you know, October 7th, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. We would love to have you. And Jack, thank you so much for letting us in and kind of letting us see how this rolls. And we hope to see you there.
All right. Thanks, Jack, for sharing your story. October 7th, that's the day. Go on the website and you go to the serve page on it and sign up. You can sign up. You can even give if you want to help make that project happen. But look ahead to that October 7th. Take advantage of it. Really fun Saturday. Get to know some other people, and we can do some good work in the community, okay? You guys, the thing I love about Jack when you listen to him talking up there is you just go, generosity is just dripping off of him. I just love it. We can be generous with our time. Some of you guys, you don't want to give up your Saturday and, sit there and watch, Alabama get beat again. I know that some of you, it's hard to give up that Saturday, but to give that up is generosity. You give up our time. We give up our talents, and the talents that God's given us, we get to bring that to somebody else, and our treasures. We look at it and say, this is an act of obedience, as we're just saying, and discipline, as we're just saying, God, this is yours, not mine. And I just want to thank you as a church that you guys are people that are always stepping up into time, talent, and treasure, and you're continuing to give, and we thank you for that. You guys that have been given financially, some of you are doing that online, and you're doing it a monthly gift, you're giving a yearly gift, you're giving a quarterly gift. Man, we love it that you are doing that to help us to continue to be for the good of our city. Some of you are just giving in the boxes on the side. We thank you for that. If you are new in this church and that's something that you would like to start to participate in, it's super easy. We made it really easy for you to go on the website and click on it, and you can choose which way you want to do that. We even did a pledge this year where you can say, if you want to, you can pledge $80 a month or $800 a month or $8,000 a month. We'd love it if lots of you did the $8,000 a month. But you can even pledge one where you can say, I want you to help hold me accountable to making sure that happens through this year. And we'll just walk with you throughout your pledge for this next year, okay? So, man, generosity it's a gift and it's a discipline. It's an obedience. It's saying, God, you have given me all this and I'm giving it back. And so jump into that with time, treasure, and talent, okay? All right, let's get John up here. He's going to be preaching for us today. I'm going to pray for him, and then we're going to let him take over. God, we are so thankful for my brother and what he does and the gifts that you've given him and how he is generous with those gifts and sharing them. God, I pray that today, as he speaks into a topic that many of us have experienced and some of us right now are dealing with, God, I pray that all of us would hear your tender voice speak to us and help us to see you in the heart of the disappointments that we've experienced or would experience in our life. So be with my brother John today. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Bill. You want to just stay up here with me? Are you good?
Sure, let's do that.
Yeah, right? Do a little team teaching.
All the field.
Well, it's good to be with you this morning. Like, as Bill said, my name is John. I want to welcome you. I'm delighted to be with you. And for everybody watching at home, thank you for tuning in. We're aware of you as well and want you to have a good experience this morning as we step into landing this plane. We've been in it for 6 weeks. This is the end point, and I get to wrap it all up and talk about feelings, because I'm the feelings guy, apparently. So Bill said my heart is tender. The reason why my heart is tender is because it's been tenderized so many times over life. You get beat up enough, you're like, okay, that sucker's got to get soft at some point. So we're going to step into this and talk about feelings and the importance of feelings. But before we do that, I want to draw your attention to one opportunity that is happening today. This community is going to the Holy Land. So if you are interested in being on a trip and go to the Holy Land in June, we are doing an informational meeting today right after the service in the Tire Center. So if you're curious, you're like Holy Land curious, or you want to step into that journey and find out more information, our good friend Dan Hauser is going to lead that discussion this morning. So please join us if you're curious and you're wondering, how does a person get connected and begin that process? We're doing it way in advance because it takes time to prepare and takes time to step into that, okay? So that's what's happening. All right, feelings. Let's talk about feelings. Our bodies experience so many emotions. And we don't always know what to do with all these emotions that we carry around. And we feel them, and we start to experience them. And then as we start to have thoughts about these emotions, they turn into feelings. And that's the stuff that we're trying to get at, is get to the feeling. So our body starts feeling something, an emotion, and then we get to the thinking pattern, and we get to the feeling part of that. And then once we get to the feeling part of that and start making meaning out of our experiences, those turn into actions and behaviors. So we have thoughts, we have feelings, and then we have behaviors that we step into, and things start coming out of our lives and out of our bodies. And sometimes we don't know what to do with all of these emotions and all of these feelings. But feelings are the things that actually give meaning to the emotions that we're experiencing. So it's really important to pay attention to the feelings, because once you get to the feelings, you're getting to the root of why you feel the way that you do. And once you start to learn why you're acting the way that you're acting or experiencing life the way that you're experiencing, that feeling becomes like a key that you can unlock and open up doors inside of your very heart and soul to go, okay, now I know what the root is. So we're always interested in getting to the root and not just dealing with the symptoms or the emotions. The emotions are there, they're valid, we've got to name them. But as we start thinking about that, we have to get underneath the emotion and get to the feeling, because that's literally the part where we experience healing and freedom. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're experiencing anger. We didn't talk about anger on this journey, but anger is a strong emotion that many of us carry in this room. And if you just look at anger and you deny its existence, or you shove it down, or you just let it flow out of your life, regardless of how other people feel, it can create all sorts of havoc on earth. So anger is a strong emotion, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's just a secondary emotion. And when you dig underneath the anger and you start to ask the question, like, what is this anger about? And the important thing with anger is to ask yourself the question, so get curious about your anger instead of judging it or berating yourself. Ask the question, what's going on inside of me? And typically what you will find with anger is that underneath it is fear. So a valid question to ask in pertaining to that tip of the iceberg is, what am I afraid of? Many times what happens when we get to the core, then we can actually deal with the emotion and bring healing to that emotion in our experience. We name it, we identify it, and then we get underneath it and we're like, okay, now we can get to work on this thing. So what am I afraid of? Many times it's loneliness. Sometimes it's disappointment that we're going to cover this morning. Sometimes it's powerlessness. I feel powerless. So I'm angry about that, and then that just literally spills out into relationships and into our human experience. So it's really important when you're dealing with emotions and when you're dealing with feelings to stay curious, because the invitation is always to move from fear to curiosity. You don't want to just be ruled by fear. You want to jump into that and go, okay, I'm going to remain curious in this and start asking better questions so that I can actually get to the thing under the thing. It's really important to identify it, and if we don't identify it, what happens in our human experience is we tend to swim in those emotions. We get overwhelmed. And then if we don't deal with the feeling and what actually is going on underneath the surface, again, it spills out into our relationship. So we're going to look at the emotion of disappointment and then asking ourselves the question, what's underneath my disappointment? getting to the thing under the thing. Now, we're going to develop some spiritual practices this morning that I think could be helpful for you. I always want to give you tools, and my intention every time that I get up here is to help you take one step closer to your healing and your freedom as a human being, because that matters. And I want you to move deeper and deeper into healing and freedom so that you can continue to expand inside yourself and open yourself up to more love and compassion. I want to start with Philippians chapter 2, verse 17 through 18. There's this man named Paul. He's in prison. Things are not going well for him. He doesn't know if he's going to live or die. And he has these statements in which he's writing to another group of Jesus followers in the city of Philippi. So he's in prison, doesn't know what the outcome of his life is going to be, and listen to what he says. He says this, "But even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me." It's that easy, right? You too should rejoice whenever you're experiencing loss or you're being emptied out. And what Paul is doing here is he's talking about reframing reality. And this is the same character who said, "I'm content in all circumstances. Whether I live or die, doesn't matter. I'm going to be with Christ either way." So I'm content in all circumstances. Now, we read these big statements, and they can feel very overwhelming to us as we read statements like this, and we think, well, that's a true spiritual giant right there to be able to say those things in the midst of loss and disappointment. But we have to realize that these big ideas aren't just something that Paul attained. He put them into practice because everything is about practice. Life is about practice. It's like all a practice session that we're stepping into to develop this muscle of wisdom so that we can grow and expand. So Paul is putting into practice this discipline of gratitude and delighting and understanding and reframing reality. He's stepping into the really real because he wants to see things as they actually are and not the way that we tend to put meaning to our experiences. So be very careful when you read these big ideas not to get tripped up in the big idea because it can feel very overwhelming. And when an idea is too big or grandiose and we say, well, that might be fine for that individual, I don't know if I could ever get there. Be very careful not to look at the bigness of it, but just take steps toward it. What kinds of steps can I take to step into that kind of wisdom? Now, a couple of observations immediately from the passage that we just looked at. His life is being poured out. He's describing how he's feeling. So if we read that on the surface, it's being poured out. It seems like Paul is getting emptied out. And in God's economy of how things actually are, somehow empty equals more. So as we get emptied out, it creates more space for the Spirit of God to dwell inside of us. So as Paul is describing his experience, that container is getting poured out and more is coming in as a result. It's almost like that's how it works in God's economy of reality. Now, as I sit with humanity and listen to humanity's story over and over and over again, there are plaguing questions that keep coming up, and I'm always looking for patterns and consistencies. And I want to share with you a few of the things that I've observed from listening to people's stories, and maybe this will resonate with some of you. Here we go. I've heard people say these things. I put my time, my energy, my resources, my heart, everything that I had into that relationship, that project, that dream, and it still didn't work out the way in which I had hoped. Boom, disappointment sets into the human soul. In fact, I did all the right things, supposedly, right? We could probably argue that. But I did all the right things. I read scripture. I was faithful to my faith community. I was faithful to my partner. I did everything that I thought I was supposed to do in the right way. I provided for my kids. I gave every resource available to my children, and boom, it didn't work out the way that I had hoped, and then disappointment sets in. All of these plaguing thoughts, questions, emotions that come up. My partner still left me even though I was the one that was fully committed. I provided every resource available to my child, and now my child doesn't want to talk to me. But I gave them everything for their benefit. I know people who were convinced that they were invited to start a business. They had this dream. They started a business. They put all of their resources in it. They put all of their time into it, everything that they had. They sunk into the business, and 5 years later, the business crashed, and now they're left with nothing. Or how about this one, since we're rolling right now and everybody's feeling good about these plaguing questions? Right? Get your education, young people. Go to college. Make sure you go to the right college. Don't pick the wrong college. Pressure, pressure, pressure. And then you go to the right college and you get your education, and then you move out into the job market, and then what happens? Well, it's not as great as we thought it was. And then you can't even get a second interview. And you're going, I put in everything and it was supposed to work. And it's like the equation says, plug this in, right actions lead to right outcomes. And then it literally doesn't happen. All of those things, those plaguing questions as we move out into the world. And here's the questions, and these aren't necessarily the best questions, but they're honest questions that we ask over and over again. Did I waste my time? Did I waste my time? Did I not hear right on this one? Did I waste all of that money and that energy and all of the time that I invested in that relationship? Did I choose the wrong profession? Can anyone relate to that? You're in 20 years to a career, and then that plaguing question, wait a minute, I've been climbing this ladder, and the whole time, the ladder's been leaning against the wrong wall. That sets in. You talk about disappointment setting into the human experience. Or how about this one? I've been on my career path for this long, or I've been in this relationship for this long, and now it's ending, and I put all of myself into it. And here's what I've discovered about disappointment. I'm giving meaning to an experience that I'm having. And many times the meaning that we're giving to our experiences aren't always true. Imagine that. We give stories, meaning to our experiences, and many times those experiences and the stories that we're putting with it aren't 100% accurate, and so we're living kind of in these half-truths. And what happens is underneath the disappointment is sadness. And we will do almost anything not to feel sad because we don't know how to handle it. If you haven't noticed, there's a lot of hurt people in the world. And if we don't acknowledge the hurt and deal with the hurt, what happens is that hurt doesn't stay inside of this container. It actually leaks out and affects the relationships with people that we're in. And instead of acknowledging pain, which is the root, we then go out into the world and we end up inflicting pain on other people. And if we don't acknowledge the disappointment that we carry, what happens is that we move out into the world and we actually live disappointed lives. And you see this over and over again. In other words, what ends up happening is those pieces of us that need to be transformed are actually being transmitted into the world and into relationships. And if those things are not transformed in us, they will spill out and affect you and everybody around you. Now, sit with that for a moment. Holy Spirit, do your thing in this room. Do what you're doing. What God is interested in is your transformation as a human being and getting to those root things. Because we understand that people will do almost anything not to feel pain, including causing pain in other people. And what happens when we cause pain in other people, we start to abuse power. And I see this in leaders all the time. People who are responsible for other people who don't deal with the hurt and the pain and the emotional stuff that they're carrying around, it literally spills out on the table and everybody else starts carrying that stuff with you. It's time for us to look at those feelings, not to ignore them, not to deny them, not to reject them, but to look right at them and ask the question, what's going on here? What am I afraid of? What am I avoiding? What do I think is happening? Listen, you gave everything that you had in that moment, in that relationship, in that career path. You jumped in, you sacrificed, because in that moment you felt like it was the right thing to do. So don't berate yourself or beat yourself up because you thought you were doing the right thing in that moment. Disappointment will set in. Welcome to being a human being. It's part of the human experience. But those things, those little seeds of disappointment, they never just lie there. They don't go into the soil of the soul and think, well, I'm just going to hang out over here in the corner. Those things start to stir up and create other things inside of us. And one of the things that I've noticed in people, especially with disappointment, is we get wrapped into this thing called the blame cycle. Are you guys familiar with the blame cycle? And we start blaming ourselves, we blame others, and then we spend time blaming situations and circumstances that are actually keeping us from moving forward. And what this does is it creates dysfunction in us, and you're not your best version of yourself. And I'm not saying don't acknowledge it. I'm not saying don't name it. I'm not saying don't get angry about it. Feel all the feels. Jump in wholeheartedly. But remember to stay curious, to move from fear to curiosity. Start asking better questions about what is that I'm feeling. I'm angry. Okay, good. What are you afraid of? Do you feel powerless right now? Are you losing control? What am I afraid of losing? And here's the thing, friends, when we start to feel powerless because the disappointment has set in and the anger has set in and all these emotions set in, we tend to get hyper-vigilant. And when we get hyper-vigilant, then we're overdoing because we're trying to over-control things instead of allowing this thing, whatever it is, to teach us to grow and expand as human beings. So if we're not addressing the feelings, we're not addressing the thing under the thing, and we're just dealing with the symptoms, we're not going to experience the healing that we need to experience. I was a youth pastor in Bel Air, California, right? The Fresh Prince of Bel Air. What a show. Bel Air Presbyterian Church, youth pastor, had all these students from all over the valley and all over the west side that would come into this little space called Bel Air Presbyterian Church. And I had kids who were from private schools and then kids who were in gangs. It was quite a mess, but it was the best kind of mess because everybody was welcome. It was really cool. And I remember parents would come to me almost every week and ask me to fix their kid. And I thought to myself, we probably should start with you and not with the kid, because the kid's behavior might be a response to something going on in you as a parent. They never liked hearing that one. Because we don't want to look at ourselves, do we? Or how am I contributing to the dysfunction and the chaos? We don't want to look at ways in which we've actually stepped into some of the problems. We just want to fix the symptoms, but we don't want to get to the core because the core is a little too close to home. But remember, as I said earlier, those parts of us that don't get transformed continue to get transmitted. So it's crucial for us to pay attention to the feelings. Again, what am I sad about? What am I angry about? What am I trying to avoid? And here's the thing, and I want you to hear this if you hear anything today. Those of us who tend to avoid the hard stuff, maybe 10% of the room, avoidance is going to make you feel less vulnerable. It's why we do it. But there's always a dark side to it. And the dark side is this. If you avoid pain, if you avoid looking at the hard things, you will never be less afraid. In fact, it will increase fear inside of you. And we don't want to be led through life by fear. We want to be curious. We want to ask good questions. We actually want to step into the disappointment. Now, I want to read a weird story out of the Old Testament. This comes from 1 Chronicles, chapter 11, 15 through 19. It's a bizarre story. You ready? Here we go. Let's read this. 3 of the 30 chiefs came down to David to the rock at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." So, the 3 broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. But he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out to the Lord. "God forbid that I should do this," he said. "Should I drink the blood of these men who went at the risk of their lives?" Because they risked their lives to bring it back, David would not drink it. Such were the exploits of the 3 mighty warriors. Leave that there for a moment, Paige. That last line, isn't that just ridiculous? Such were the exploits of the 3 mighty warriors. Almost feels like it was a later edition. You're like, what is that? Is that how you land a story? And anytime you read the scriptures and you start to see these weird lines, such were the exploits of the three mighty warriors, you go, oh, something else is going on here. So we dig into the story because it's a strange story, but David's actions seem really odd because of the sacrifice of his mighty men. So David and his men are held up in a cave about 10 to 15 miles outside of Bethlehem. Bethlehem is where David grew up as a child, and their enemy, the Philistines, have established a fortress at Bethlehem. So they're standing against David and his men. And David says, oh, in the heat of the moment, oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem. Now, this can't be about physical thirst. David's a king. He has access to water. This has got to be about something else. And I think what could be going on here is David is longing to go back to a simpler time in life. He wants to go back to the well of what was. You know about the well of what was? Go back to that moment where you felt connected, whole, things were working, things were easier, taxes took 5 to 10 minutes and not 5 to 10 days. All of the simplicity of life. David is a leader. He's encamped. All of the pressure is on his shoulders. He just wants to go back to a simpler time in life, because if I can just go back, then things are going to be great. But what I've realized in my life is when you go back and you're a child or things were simpler, when we're young, don't we always want to go forward? It seems like I'm 12, I can't wait to be 20. I can't wait to be 25 because then things are really going to open up for me. And then we get to 25 and you're like going, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Then you get to 35 and you're like, oh my gosh, it's a circus. And you want to go back and then you want to go forward. You're not quite sure where you want to be. But David wants to go back, and I understand that because I want to go back to simplicity sometimes because of the pressure, and it's too great. So his mighty warriors, these mighty men, hear David's desire, and 3 of them decide to go and break through the Philistine line, and this offensive line. They break through it. They draw water from the well of Bethlehem. They come back through the line. They make it all the way back to David, give him the water as if to expect, like, I did it. Do you see what we did? We conquered this great thing. David takes the water and he pours it out. And you're like, that's ridiculous. And he says in verse 18, he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out to the Lord. Now, this is really important here. Some observations. Whenever you see Lord, capital Lord, that is another way to explain who God is. That capital Lord is translated as Yahweh. And Yahweh represented something to the people of God. He represented something that they understood with imagery and understanding, that this God is active in the world, that this God is liberating and saving humanity. They understood that this God, Yahweh, was a God to co-create with, to co-participate in the healing of the freedom of the world, to step into this dance with Yahweh, to do the things that Yahweh is about in the world. So when David pours out this water, he's pouring it out to Yahweh. And for years and years and years, people had been bringing water and bringing food and bringing sacrifice to the altar of Yahweh because they understood that everything in life was a gift. It's all sacred. And so they would stop, acknowledge Yahweh's saving presence in the world, take a sacred thing like this sacrifice and pour it back into Yahweh's presence, because this is how you keep your soul alive. Understanding, acknowledging all of it. Even in the midst of the worst situations, when disappointment sets into the human category, it's all sacred. You offer all of it up. The sadness, the anger, the impatience, the offense, the anxiety, the loneliness. You offer all of it up to Yahweh because all of it is sacred. And what David is doing is actually honoring the sacrifice of these other human beings. No great leader would take the water and then just drink it. But this is a way of saying, I'm honoring what you have done. I'm honoring this sacrifice because the sacrifice is what made it sacred, not the water. The sacrifice is what made it significant. And David understands all of us are co-creating. All of us are co-participating with the divine. All of us, if we choose to do so, can step into this rhythm. And here we read Paul, my life is being poured out like a drink offering. And he's doing it in the midst of his own sadness, grief, disappointment. Things are not working out for him. And yet he can say, I offer all of it up because it's all sacred, even this. And what he's doing is he sees the act of becoming as more important than the outcome of the action. That act of becoming, the kind of person that you are becoming, is what matters in the sacrifice. It's not the outcome of the sacrifice. It's who am I becoming as I'm working through all of these emotions and feelings. Did I waste my time? Did I put too much into this, my energy? A better question would be, what kind of person am I becoming as I go through and experience all these emotions and feelings? And making room for it. And even in this situation, my life is being offered as a drink offering. My life is being poured out because empty means more, not the other way around. And in God's economy, things are always flipped upside down because it's all for the healing and the freedom of the world. Your container, as it's being poured out, is expanding, so it's making more room for others to experience healing and freedom. The healing is not just for you, it's for the sake of other people. So when you get healed, don't just hold on to it, give it away so that others can experience healing. Now, I know this raises lots of questions. And as these questions come up, well, what about all that money that I lost? What about all that time that I lost and that energy? What about all the sacrifices in that 20 years of marriage? What about my career? And what about that kid who doesn't want to talk to me? What about that? I poured myself into all of that, and nothing has come back as a result of that. What about that? Well, according to ancient wisdom, you offer it up and you reframe reality and you step into the really real, because now you're starting to see what this is all about. It's actually about the container that is your life expanding, opening up so that you can hold more grief, more sadness, more compassion, more love, all the things that make Yahweh who Yahweh is, so that we can be about saving and liberating humanity. That stuff that's being transformed is actually expanding us so that we can hold more love, more joy, all the feels, all the emotions, because that time, that sacrifice, that commitment, all that money that you put in and no one else saw you doing it, it all mattered because you were becoming a certain kind of person, because you understood the value of stepping into co-creation with the divine. That's what matters. Who am I becoming in these actions? It also taught us that every time that you went to the well and you're drawing water from Yahweh, you are literally drawing from the well of abundance. You're not drawing from lack and limit and separation, everything that you're not. You're drawing from Yahweh. You're drawing from this good, beautiful God. And as you continue to draw, you think you're depleting it, but it's actually continuing to fill up, because we're talking about the God of the universe. And as you draw from this well, it begins to fill you up, but it's not intended for you just to hold it. It's intended for you to pour it out. Empty yourself. Make room for more. And fear keeps us locked into the belief that there's not enough. Fear, Let's jump from fear to curiosity, from control to trust. And that when you draw from the well of Yahweh, you're drawing from the well where there's always enough. I want to leave you with 2 important prayers that have changed my life. And I want to invite you to step into these practices. And they're really complicated. Are you ready? Number 1, the first prayer is this: thank you. As you wake up in the morning, as you go to sleep at night, just to simply say, thank you. Thank you for all of it. Thank you for my emotions, my feelings. Thank you. And the second prayer is this: offer it up. I offer this up. My hopes, my dreams, my children, my relationships, my marriage, my partner, I offer him up. I offer her up. Because what happens when we step into these prayers, we start to realize that there's a time for everything. There's a time to be exhausted, and there's a time to rest. There's a time to be in motion, and then there's a time to stop. There's a time to be sad, and then there's a time not to be sad and to be filled with delight. There's a time for all of it. Make room for all of it. And maybe, just maybe, things are not working out for you because they're not supposed to work out for you. Let go of your entitlement. Let go of that understanding, like, well, I deserve this because. Let go of all of that. Offer it up. Maybe Yahweh wants to transform those bits and pieces of you that need work so that you can open up and actually bring healing and freedom into the world. And maybe, just maybe, Yahweh is inviting us to co-create and to co-participate in the renewal of all things in relationships and in people. And Yahweh is committed to expanding our containers so that we can actually hold more and actually meet that well of abundance where Yahweh lives and breathes and pours back into humanity. Maybe all the sacrifice and the time and the energy and the resource is just part of that bigger picture that we don't fully understand because we're connected to everything and everyone. So offer it up. Thank you. Offer it up.